This is Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit. Dwayne Wade and the Transgender Travesty, Part 3. Fitz said he attempted suicide once, opting to jump to his death from the balcony of his high-rise apartment, but it was foiled. His cat was looking like she was going to jump off with him, and he didn't want her to die, so he stepped back from the edge. But then he felt as though suicide was wrong entirely, and he should try to channel his anguish in a positive direction and use his painful experience to help other people in similar situations. Shuffled around to doctors. In the months that followed, he was shuffled around to various doctors, all of whom were either LGBT identified themselves or sympathetic to transgenderism. None of them helped him, he said. One told him he needed to get some therapy to help him get over his internalized transphobia. Exasperated beyond words, he figured he would go revisit the surgeon that performed the orchiectomy years earlier, thinking a follow-up visit might provide more answers. When Fitz returned to his office, he said the surgeon was surprised to see him and claims he denied any responsibility for the complications he suffered after the operation. According to Fitz, the surgeon got defensive and asked him to leave his office. Fitz said he didn't budge, recalling that he told the surgeon that he was indeed a big part of his ordeal and that the surgery caused a lot of his misery. The surgeon got up and opened the door, demanded Fitz leave or he would call the police, and suggested he call a lawyer. Fitz went home and started looking for local medical malpractice lawyers, calling dozens of different attorneys, most of whom did not return his phone calls. A few talked to him but refused to work with him and allegedly called him a bigot or transphobe. Others thought his situation was weird and told him they didn't understand the issues and didn't want to get involved because it sounded too risky. Only one person said he would help him. I felt very stuck. If only 1 in 40 would help me, then I must be desperate. I'll do anything my attorney says, Fitz told the Journal. As he pursued legal recourse, he finally found a physician who was willing to help him detransition. A doctor who advised him to get therapy, which he did. Fitz opened a Twitter account and began tweeting under a pseudonym. He was frequently attacked by trans activists and their left-wing cheerleaders. As it became clearer, he was detransitioning and rejecting a trans identity. Many of his local friends started distancing themselves because they either felt outwardly offended or uncomfortable around him and stopped talking with him. These supposed friends considered him a political liability. Around this time, existential questions were besetting him. Am I a trans? Is anybody trans? He would wonder. Compounding the confusion was the emergence of news stories about Kaitlyn Jenner, formerly Bruce, and Rachel Dolezal, a white woman who worked for the NAACP who claimed to be black. As transgenderism was being mainstreamed, his peers would excitedly ask him if he was happy to see positive coverage of transgender identifying persons. And I would say, well, actually, no. The whole thing is a fraud, and it's starting to fall apart for me, and I bet it will for everyone else too, he responded. Such exchanges were awkward, and he found himself not getting invitations to parties and gatherings of friends. Others whom he thought were friends stopped taking his phone calls. Fitz found the cognitive dissonance staggering that Dolezal was widely mocked and rejected for saying she felt like she was black, but Jenner was enthusiastically embraced for saying he felt he was a woman. The only people who offered him any meaningful help and support at the time were Christians and radical feminists. But today, a few years later, support is more diverse as more of the general public has become aware of how little sense transgenderism actually makes. I've got support from men and women, gay and straight, left and right, he said. On Twitter, the only ones who would tweet sympathy were radical feminists. He started learning more about radical feminism, and much of the analysis made a lot of sense to him. Radical feminism, he soon learned, was quite different from the third wave liberal feminism, which supports transgender ideology. Fitz took legal action against one of the doctors who treated him, but is not legally permitted to say how it ended. But he was at the time satisfied with the conclusion. The post-operative agony continues. As months went by in his detransition process, Fitz increasingly found himself wanting to live free from hormones, so he stopped taking them. Doctors told him not to do that, but he did anyway and soon got sick. Because of the hormone withdrawal, he started experiencing menopause-like symptoms. I was irritated and confused. I was fatigued. I had hot flashes and cold chills. I became easily injured. It was a bad deal, he said. About a year into his detransition, he received a diagnosis of being medium functional on the autism spectrum, a common comorbidity to gender dysphoria that gender ideologues usually ignore. Fitz maintains that the condition contributed to his struggles to communicate effectively with doctors. Fitz also had to get a mastectomy. As a result of the estrogen intake, he had grown breasts. After having a prescription drug crash in one particular day, he recounted how the proverbial fog lifted and he took stock of his life, surveying the past near decade, feeling like it had all been some weird party trick. I used to look in the mirror and I thought I looked too male and I need to correct that. And now I was looking in the mirror and I looked too female, he said. He shopped around for various surgeons to remove the excess breast tissue, but some refused him because he was a detransitioner. Before he could proceed, his surgeon requested he go on testosterone for a year. He found that as a male, testosterone made him feel healthy and clear-headed, and that it helped him sleep. I hate that I now have an addiction to chemical testosterone, he said. Testosterone is also expensive, and when it's not a government plan that is paying for everything, it's costly, and it's also a controlled substance, much more regulated than estrogen because it's more abused. Fitz said It's always an administrative hassle when he changes insurance companies. He thought that once he stopped taking the estrogen, the breasts would go away, especially because when he was younger, he had gynecomastia, a condition that occurs as a result of an increase in the amount of breast gland tissue in boys or men caused by a hormonal imbalance. That went away on its own. Unfortunately, his transgender, chemically induced breast growth were here to stay. Fitz underwent a mastectomy in February 2019. Fighting back, Fitz has managed to reunite with his family, but they do not talk about his transition. To this day, they do not know he had an orchiectomy. He is unsure about what they know about his cross-sex hormone use. I don't bring it up, and they don't ask questions, he said. They're aware of some details, but not all. They were glad to have me back, but I feel really awful for my sister because I abandoned her. She has a few kids. She had a baby when I left, and now she has 2 boys, and one is in high school. I feel guilty about that. Yet he continued to search for answers. He found some detransitioners online, all of whom lived in California. He eventually got together with a few of them and discussed their transition journeys. Around the same time, another former transgender presented an opportunity for Fitz and a few others to meet with attorneys from a Christian legal firm to discuss their legal options. Fitz had never heard of the firm, but since other lawyers didn't give a damn about him, he was grateful for any legal advisors who might be willing to listen and help. I didn't know they were conservative-leaning Christians, and when I looked them up, it didn't bother me, he told the Journal. In the fall of 2017, he and about a dozen other detransitioners went to their headquarters and sat at a table for several hours and shared their stories with them. From breakfast to dinner, we talked. We talked and the lawyers listened, and it was very nice, because to that point, no one was listening to us, he said. After they shared their personal ordeals, they discussed what they might do on a legal front. The Journal confirmed with another detransitioner that this meeting indeed happened. Fitz believes lawsuits are the best tool for social change and hopes to be part of a large-scale effort to sue the gender clinics that harmed him and his fellow travelers. Though he took action against his doctor, he also wanted to sue the surgeon who performed the orchiectomy. But as a result of the state statute of limitations, he could not. Many states, including California, have 1-year statutes of limitations for legal action to be taken against surgeons for malpractice. Because Fitz didn't attempt to have sex for over a year after his surgery, it was too late for him to realize he had a problem, and his primary care doctor had told him to wait it out and that it would get better on its own. This is a typical experience of other detransitioners he has spoken to, who also regret their surgeries, he noted. They'll say, I want to sue. And my first question to them is, well, how long has it been, Fitz said. It often takes up to several years to come out of this gaslighting fog of what has happened to us, and by then it's far too late. He believes the laws are written to protect doctors and their insurers. When lawsuits are filed against doctors, the plaintiffs mostly deal with their insurance companies, he said. Fitz still wants to sue the surgeon who removed his testicles, but does not know if that is possible. I would like to sue WPATH for their convoluted, misleading, and negligent standards of care. I like to sue the Endocrine Society for being complicit. I like to sue the California Medical Board. I like to join a class action lawsuit. I don't know how these things can happen, he said.